So it's a great pleasure to be taking part in Hospital Room's Digital Art School. My name's Dryden Goodwin, and I'm sitting here with Nikke, and I'm going to be making a drawing and inviting you to do the same. I've kind of provisionally called today Draw Someone, a kind of invitation to sit down with a piece of paper, a pencil and an eraser, and to sit and draw someone. And it's something that I do a lot in my own work. I'm really kind of interested in how you capture people, how you might use drawing, but also photography and video, and also recording sound to capture someone. And that might be I might make a lightning sketch, a very quick sketch, or a more sustained drawing. But I'm kind of really intrigued by the challenge and the intrigue, and also the privilege of sitting and drawing someone. Often I'm in conversation with people as I draw, but very rarely am I in a studio context. So this is quite a new experience for me. I'm often moving around the city, maybe in London, maybe in a project in another country, but kind of drawing on the fly and on the move. And I think there's something about making a drawing, the sort of sense that when you're among people, it can be overwhelming. But there's something about the focus of sitting with someone and to create a connection, and somehow the drawing enables you to hold that experience. So I don't want to be overly prescriptive with what I'm proposing, but I want to sort of throw out some notions and ideas as I draw, and hopefully some of those are things you might latch onto as you're making your drawing. And you might be drawing from someone in front of you, you might be drawing maybe from a photograph, or you might be drawing from a picture in a magazine. But so I'm very interested in the potential connection that can be made there. So let's begin. So Nikke. So that's great where you're sitting, and I'll just begin the drawing now. It was interesting, this experience of drawing, and often I'm kind of talking with people as I draw, but the idea of talking about the process of drawing as you're drawing is a kind of new kind of experience. So this feels very kind of, I like the experimental aspects of that, kind of reflecting on the process as you're making it.
It's probably quite counterintuitive.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. It's kind of interesting because I suppose you've got these different processes going through your head, and kind of a key thing is a kind of interesting starting point. I think is to think about the light, and often in circumstances you're in, you can't really control that. You're kind of I'm drawing people where I'm going into their environments, whether that's home or work, and drawing them, and that can't be controlled. But what's kind of interesting is that if you've got an opportunity to sit with someone, or you could decide to sit next to a window as you're doing, or you might sit with light that's directly on you, on the subject. Or it might be artificial light and directional light, and all those kind of decisions are kind of really interesting because light creates a kind of drama across the face and sort of draws out features, and so there's something really kind of exciting about kind of thinking about those possibilities. I mean, there's a lovely drawing by, it's an etching by Rembrandt. These studies that he's made of Saskia, his wife. These are from 1637, and I just think sort of really, really wonderful how the kind of light kind of shapes the face and the kind of drama, and here where she's sort of sitting half away from the light, so the shadow, and the kind of using the cross-hatching to build that sense of form, sitting in space. And here's beautiful kind of where the hand comes across, and this sort of shadow that's played on the forms of the space between the hand and the face. But it's, I think, kind of really sort of fascinating, this sort of sense of sitting with someone and drawing them, and that you're kind of there's we haven't met before, and you're sitting and you're drawing, and you're okay. I'm peering at you intensely, and kind of starting to study your face, and so there's something really fascinating about that experience, isn't there, of encountering another human being, and there's something very powerful, I think, within that, and that that you as we're talking, we exchange conversation. I'm asking you questions, you're asking me questions, but as I'm drawing as well, I'm kind of collating other sorts of knowledge too, a kind of a sense of your presence within space, and that sort of sense of exchange. But then at the same time, there's something very kind of abstract about the kind of process that I'm going through, and that I'm sort of oscillating between something very subjective but also very objective, and starting to look for certain shapes within your face, and I'm seem to be kind of starting. I seem to start with the eyes, I suppose. Often I can see that with drawings that I've documented. I suppose that sort of relates to looking. But then I'm starting to kind of, from then navigate to the rest of your face, where I'm sort of seeing certain shapes, maybe that aren't the features themselves, but are kind of across your eyes and across the brow of your nose and then your hair. Giacometti said something really interesting about the kind of the space between the nose and the eye, and somehow it's like a desert, and how you kind of can map your way across that using drawing. There's something very there's not things you can name, but there's a plane that sits in space of your face, and it falls away in space, and how you can document that. So it's interesting, this kind of oscillation between the kind of subjective and the objective, and sometimes I kind of feel like a bit like a bit dysfunctional 3D scanner, where I'm kind of thinking, trying to work again and again, reviewing and drawing as I go along, and trying to map in space. But also the sort of sense of the imagination, that as you're drawing, a kind of a sense of what you're seeing, but also the sense of the head, which is outer sight, which is unseen, and how you can kind of plot that, through this kind of area which is your hair, but how we can kind of draw that out. What's interesting too, how you use the sort of positive shapes that you might be drawing the forehead, but and the hair, but then when we look behind you, there's this kind of piece of architecture, and it creates like a negative space behind you, and how the head is defined by both its positive shape, but also the negative space, and how they kind of bolt together, and how you draw them together, and that helps you define its shape.
Do you find it intimidating starting a new drawing?
I don't. I mean, it's kind of interesting, that sort of sense of the sort of speculative nature of drawing, that if you're making a drawing, it's an attempt to kind of someone of trying to render them in space, but of course the number of times that you do them, the number of drawings that you do, they'll always be different, and so and I think that sense of freedom, and sort of taking a risk and trying to draw someone in space, I think that's great to kind of fuel you as you start to make a drawing. Now, it's interesting what you're saying about being drawn, and the kind of the experience of being drawn or drawing someone. And I mean, what excites me is that you're drawing someone's physical likeness, but you're also kind of engaging with someone who could have had a very different life experience to you, and with a very sort of different outlook on the world, a very different point in their life, and there seems to be value in that of kind of looking and engaging with people, and what can be discovered. Also about who you're looking at, but also about yourself as you're making the drawing.
So do you find it easier to do live drawings than drawings from photographs?
I work in different ways. I mean, I make a lot of work in front of... It's great, the light's lovely coming in. I make a lot of work directly in front of people, and in different situations. Sometimes engaging directly in conversation, sometimes drawing them as they're engrossed in something, they're working or they're making something, and I draw them. But also I'm kind of interested in how if you draw from a photograph, it's still a kind of portal into that person's life, and that kind of sense of intimacy that's possible, that's built up from that focused time. And of course you've got a different sorts of information there, but somehow you're remote from them, but through the photograph there's a kind of a sense of intimacy that can be built up. So I think they're different. I think I'm intrigued because I've worked a lot. Sometimes I've scratched directly into photographs with drawing, or I've worked from drawings, or I've worked from drawings where people are kind of really small and made tiny drawings as a way to kind of draw into their world. But so I like those differences between drawing in different ways. It's great how with the cloud cover we got, the light is changing a lot. And this is kind of interesting that you're kind of looking directly into my eyes. I mean, there's a really beautiful drawing by Claudette Johnson. This is a drawing of a friend and a friend who's also an artist, and she's made lots of drawings of her. But what's kind of really intriguing is this kind of focus on the face, and how that's sort of in monochrome, and how the colour's introduced, but it creates this focus, and that she's looking away from the camera. She's sort of, her eyes are kind of pointing down, and we don't know if she's asleep or she's kind of resting, or her eyes are shut. There's something about a sense of that kind of holds something back. There's a kind of quietness to that drawing, which I think is really kind of beautiful. Are those decisions about how you might draw someone, but also how someone chooses to present themselves to you, I think is really kind of interesting, and both in the making, but also within the viewing of a drawing of someone. It's interesting because I draw here. It seems to be too kind of heavy, the lower part of your face, and I've got to kind of strip that back in the drawing. in the drawing.
Do you find it easier to draw strangers or people you already know?
Yeah, that's really intriguing. I think what's quite interesting is that by drawing a stranger, somehow you can become incredibly familiar with them. But then by drawing someone that you know very well, that can be quite a distancing experience too. And so your sense of someone through the experience of drawing, I think, changes, and there's a great kind of pleasure and intrigue in that, I think. It's interesting with like different choices of pencil, because there's a with very soft pencils, there's a very different torque between the pencil and the page, and also the quality of paper. And I think that this idea that you're kind of pressing into the surface of the paper, but you're also kind of projecting across space. Like you're over there, and somehow I'm drawing you here, but somehow there's a kind of a contact between you and I. These kind of lines that are being kind of sent out, but the choice of pencil, if you choose a very hard pencil, of course, that gives you a very different sense of torque from the surface. So that's maybe something to kind of interesting to think about when choosing a pencil. And you might make a drawing where you just use the same pencil, weight of pencil, or you might make a drawing where you combine lots of different pencils. Sometimes it's kind of helpful if someone's, if you're still and you're still drawing and you're still. But sometimes it's kind of interesting when you're moving or they're moving, because somehow it kind of makes you look again, and also with the changing of the light, it's kind of interesting because the light's just very active here, and keeps on changing. But that kind of is useful because you have a sense of the form of your face in space, and the changing light helps you review that and re-question that. I think it's kind of interesting that you could be thinking about internal shapes of the space. The shape of your forehead, the shape of your eye socket, and how that interrelates to your hair, but or different tonal spaces. Where's the lightest area, where's the darkest area, and how that interrelates. And as I'm drawing, I find myself doing that really kind of quickly, and the frequency of that change really quickly. But maybe if you're not so used to drawing, you might kind of think of a kind of checklist of things that you might want to, certain questions you might want to ask yourself. Sort of saying, what are the kind of primary shapes and the proportion of those primary shapes within the face itself, or where are the lightest parts of the tone? Is that the forehead, or is that the side of the face? And you're going through this sort of checklist, or what about the negative shapes? How the kind of the hair makes how that relates to the face, the shapes within the face itself. And that you're constantly asking those questions as you're going through. So it's almost like it might be like a kind of game you're playing, where you keep on having these questions come up as you make the drawing. Great, I'm going to leave it there. I could keep going for the rest of the day, but he might pass out. No, it's kind of interesting to think about duration of drawings, and when you stop, or how you negotiate that. And I mean, going back to Rembrandt, and this is a beautiful silver point again of Saskia, his wife. This one a few years earlier, 1633, but there's something so kind of fantastic and direct about the kind of the way that lines have been used more intensely on the face, but this kind of very kind of provisional way that the dress has been sort of penciled in, and the way that her hand has been made, and how the light has been put in. So something kind of very kind of quick and immediate, and maybe many of these studies could be done in quite a short amount of time. Or if you look at something like this, which is a study that I took from my son's wall this morning, but there's Giacometti. It's a painting, but there's something kind of very kind of drawing about the sensibility and how he uses paint. But here he's sitting in front of someone and drawing them over time, and making mark on top of mark on top of mark, and this sort of sustained looking, and this sort of accumulation of attempts to find a way of rendering someone's head and figure within space, that might take a much longer time to do. Because I think these are really interesting things to think about when you're making studies of people, and how that defines and records the experience of the encounter in different ways. But it's been a pleasure to draw you, Nikkei. Thank you very much, and also to draw in front of you. And hopefully you're making some fantastic drawings too, which I'm sure you're doing.